watch his step.
The Green awakens from his bed at an impasse at what game to review next. He notices while browsing Steam that a game called Hades has been getting a lot of praise. Recognizing the developer's name and recalling their past works, he realizes what he has to do next.
Don't worry, the whole review isn't going to be like this. Plus, some call me Johnny already did that shit years ago, and I'm not trying to rip off anybody.
Anyway, Bastion, Supergiant's first game and one of the most acclaimed indie games of the 2010s. Yeah, I remember when this game came out. This game was a part of that indie game explosion around that time with games like Super Meat Boy, Limbo, Dust, and many others. Saw it on the Xbox Live Arcade back in the day and thought it looked pretty, but it didn't really interest me beyond that since I was too much of a Halo COD boy at the time. Nowadays, my taste in games is a lot more all around, and I definitely appreciate these small passion projects a lot more now. It also helps that since 2011, the indie game scene has expanded tremendously. Nowadays, we have indie games looking more graphically intensive than some of the AAA stuff, which is pretty dope. An older game like this obviously isn't one of them, but if I didn't tell you what year this game came out and instead told you it came out last week, would you believe me? You probably would, because the look of this game still holds up pretty well. Really dig the hand-painted cartoony look of the characters and environments. You don't see too many isometric games with colors this vibrant and soft, and it's definitely a welcome change. It's obvious with some of these still image cutscenes that this game didn't have too much of a budget to work with, but it doesn't really matter since the art is so nicely drawn. I also thought it was cool how levels would literally form right in front of you as you go through it. Apparently this was both to forego a map and express beauty in the apocalypse. Well, I could definitely see the latter, but the former doesn't make much sense since the game is really linear. But before I get into the gameplay, I guess I should lay down a quick synopsis of this game's plot. So you awaken in this western post-apocalyptic fantasy world as a kid known as the Kid. He seeks refuge in a place called the Bastion, where you meet the narrator, who explains that the land you dwell used to be a civilization called Solandia, but everything went to shit due to something called the Calamity. It's heavily implied that rebuilding the Bastion through gathering these cores will somehow restore Solandia, but you're kept in the dark for most of the game on how that works, so we'll get back to that later. For now, let's get some damn cores. So don't let the isometric view of this game fool you. This is way more of an action game than it is an RPG. Hell, it's practically a hack and slash with how you have to take on waves of enemies using a bunch of different types of weapons. It's nowhere near the depth of those type of games though, since there's no combos and only 2 button presses, one being a melee attack and the other a ranged weapon. Along with those, you can also block, counter, evade, and even do a special attack as a cherry on top. The combat isn't deep at all, but it still manages to be fun to play. It's fast-paced with a nice interplay with all the mechanics I mentioned before. The enemies do have a tendency to swarm, which will definitely keep players on their toes. However, this game really wasn't hard at all, with health being as abundant as fucking pennies. The only consistent deaths I had were in these reflection segments where you're fighting off waves of enemies in escalating difficulty. Wait, did he just... you know what? Never mind. Luckily, there's the idols, which you can use to make the game harder in a customizable way. Yeah, I need my games to be challenging. It is what it is. I don't hold it against the game though, it's just a personal preference. The RPG stuff does seem kinda tacked on though. It's just kinda there and it doesn't really contribute much to the gameplay loop. You don't really level up too often, and it's not like leveling up noticeably makes the kid stronger. Still, messing around with all these different weapons the kid gets was pretty fun. You got everything from a hammer to dual pistols to a goddamn rocket launcher. All are pretty effective too, which makes everything worth trying out. I'm mostly stuck with the war machete and the breaker's bow though. One cripples while the other poisons, which makes for a damn good combination if you ask me. I do wish the level design was a little bit more creative. I don't have a problem with linearity, but I do wish these levels were a little bit more open-ended with how you find and get to the core. But I guess it's not that big of a deal since I didn't really notice how straightforward the levels were until New Game Plus. First playthrough I was too occupied trying to listen to the narrator. Oh yeah, I probably should talk about that since it's one of the main appeals of this game. The narrator in this game is the arbiter of all story and lore in this game. He comments on everything, what the kid does or should be doing in the level.
That a survivor? No ma'am, it's a gas fella, forced out from underground. Kid pops him good. Fella got a piece of it though. Kid just rages for a while.
The backstory of said level.
The Langston River flowed free and wild till the Calamity drank it all up. Maybe all that water just grew wings and flew off.
The weapon loadout the kid has.
Kid don't always care for fancy guns and things. A bow and pike will do just fine.
The cutscenes, obviously, and even what other characters are thinking and feeling. He's a welcome voice if you ask me. He has this old, grizzled cowboy way of speaking, which is pretty badass.
The windbags ain't so lucky. They've been left to freeze or starve or face the kid. Wham! Kid's ready for the windbags this time.
Pretty creative way in trying to tell the story without stopping the gameplay, which I always appreciate. He makes a lot of otherwise straightforward levels worth going through as he slowly reveals what the hell is going on. The only problem is that sometimes you're so preoccupied with battle that you miss out on what he's saying. But yeah, Logan Cunningham definitely deserves some props for his role here.
You know who also deserves some props? This guy, because the soundtrack in this game fucking slaps.
How would I describe the music? Western, trip-hop, Indian folk? Yeah, I'll go with that. A lot of beautiful string melodies combined with these down-tempo drums and bluesy guitars. A chunk of the music sounds like something Beck would have made back in the day. It definitely fits the rugged, Western, but still whimsical fantasy aesthetic that the game was going for. A couple of joints I'm walking away with are In Case of Trouble, Bend the Breaker, and Terminal March. So, during the kid's adventure, he runs into two survivors of a race of people called the Ura. Zolf, an ambassador from the homeland, and Zia, a girl who can sing her ass off. Upon coming back from one of his core escapades, it's told to you by the narrator that Zolf intentionally damaged the Bastion more and has fled to his homeland. This leaves the kid to go on more missions, finding shards to repair the damn thing.
What an asshole!
It's revealed that Solandia and the Ura were at war with each other before the Calamity, and that the Calamity was caused by a malfunctioning weapon designed to eradicate the Ura. It did the job mostly, but that shit was also hacked to destroy Solandia as well. After the kid gets the final shard from the Ura homeland, he's given a choice to either use the Bastion to rewind time before the Calamity, or evacuate and just live in the world as it currently is. You're not given the aftermath of these choices, although it's implied that the Calamity will happen again in the former, so yeah, fuck that noise. I'm pretty sure that this is the happy ending. To be honest, I'm not really sure about how I feel about the overall story in this game. A lot of these story beats, I find myself not caring about what goes on. I think the main reason is because the main goal of the game is to restore a place that's already long gone, and there's not really enough reason for me to give a shit about restoring it. I mean, the kid is a mute, so I don't know what the fuck he thinks or wants. The narrator seems apathetic about the whole situation and just goes with what the kid does. And the Ura people aren't around long enough for the player to really give a shit about what they want. You are given more insight on who everybody is with these reflection parts, but during these parts I was more focused on surviving each gauntlet rather than hearing the narrator out. The story isn't badly written or anything. In fact, the lore on its own is interesting enough. It's just the way it's presented didn't grab me. So yeah, that's Bastion. Pretty enjoyable if you ask me. It's not a game that will hold your attention for long given its short length, but it's not a game that needs to be long anyway given its mechanics. The art style is pleasing to look at, the soundtrack bumps, and the core gameplay never got boring. Not bad for a debut indie game. Pretty interested to see what Transistor's about, so yeah, until next time.